May Jesus and Mary be loved by all hearts. Today we continue our line-by-line reflections on the secret of La Salette. Why do we call it a secret? It's been published by church authorities since 1879. I can indicate 4 good reasons. Number 1, during the apparition, Our Lady herself introduced this part of the approved apparition as a secret. Melanie, what I'm about to tell you now will not always be secret. You can publish it in 58. 2, the apparition is very long, so it's naturally convenient to divide it into sections and even to number the paragraphs. There is the public message about the 2nd and 3rd commandments given in the local dialect, then 3 parts in French, the secret given to Melanie, the secret given to Maximin, and the rule for a new religious order. Then we have the sight of the future community in action, which Melanie beheld while Our Lady was speaking. And finally, the conclusion, also in patois. Third, another reason is for still calling it the secret is that it includes many references to the symbols of the book of the Apocalypse, the abyss, the King of Kings of darkness, behold the beast with its subjects, and the 2 prophets, Enoch and Elijah. Back in 1846, the Apocalypse was basically a secret book. Even the most devout Catholic who could understand Latin or owned a translation of the Missal would not have heard passages at Mass. In the Missale Romanum, promulgated by Pope Pius V in 1570, 0% of the Book of Revelation was proclaimed at the Latin Mass, compared to 32% in the Missal of Paul VI, during which it's read in the vernacular. In the Old Breviary, it was a little better. In the Office of Matins, there were short excerpts for 2 weeks in the Paschal season. But scarcely any of the laity prayed the Old Latin Breviary, and even many religious were not educated enough to do more than pronounce the words. Compare this to our current divine office. Since 1973, priests, religious, and quite a few laypersons read 4 weeks of long passages, basically the entire book of the Apocalypse. Even if the book remains mysterious, it has now become familiar. By the way, I can state those facts with confidence because I personally built comparison charts for the Roman Breviary, the Old Carmelite Breviary, and our current Vatican II Breviary to help the monks with their desire to update the Carmelite Breviary. I'll provide a link to one of the charts. Since Vatican II, our liturgies have immersed us in the Word of God. And fourthly, another good reason for continuing to call it the secret of La Salette is that the concept of a secret typically refers to events in the future. Even tomorrow is a secret to everybody. Who of us can say for certain that we'll wake up in the morning? A million surprising things might happen tomorrow. We might get a check in the mail from some distant relative. We might stumble on a crack in a sidewalk and land in the hospital. But most of what happens tomorrow depends on our actions today. If I don't go shopping today, I can't expect to have some necessary item tomorrow. If I don't apply for a job, I am not going to get a call from the employer tomorrow telling me that I'm hired. If I habitually take out my frustrations on my loved ones, they might move out tomorrow. Prophecy is contingent by nature. God's prophets usually proclaim that something is definitely going to happen unless we change our behavior. On Saturday afternoon, September 19, 1846, on the mountain plateau at La Salette, Mary began her great news with, If my people will not repent, I will be compelled to let go of the hand of my son. It is so heavy and weighs me down so much I can no longer keep hold of it. The prophet is a welcome messenger to good people who are already aware that society has made sin a norm. Good people are well aware that God will not tolerate sin indefinitely. They welcome prophecy because it reminds the unrighteous that God is merciful and punishment can be reduced, delayed, or even eliminated on condition that sinful behavior would stop. For all these reasons, true prophets do not say that such and such will happen on a certain day or year. Rather, the prophet describes sets of circumstances, and this seems somewhat secretive. Jesus did not give us the date of his return, but gave us some circumstances. From the fig tree, learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also when you see these things taking place, you know that he is near, at the very gates. Jesus told us to pay attention to signs because they indicate for us what God is doing at a given point in history. Jesus doesn't want us to be afraid and caught off guard. He doesn't want us to live in darkness, but to be children of the light. So now that we've established why we'll continue to refer to this part of the apparition as the secret of La Salette, and why it's important to examine it, let's return to our discussion of the second paragraph of the secret. Let's read it again. The priests, ministers of my Son, the priests, by their wicked manner of life, by their irreverence and impiety in celebrating the holy mysteries, by their love of money, love of honor and pleasures, priests have become cesspools of impurity. The sins of priests cry out for vengeance, and vengeance looms over their heads. Woe to those priests and persons consecrated to God, who by their infidelity and wicked lives are crucifying my Son again. The sins of those consecrated to God scream to heaven and call for vengeance, and behold, vengeance is at their door, since there is no longer anyone to implore mercy and forgiveness for the people. There are no more generous souls, no one worthy anymore to offer the unblemished victim to the Eternal on behalf of the world. Our Lady begins with a bitter attack against priests and religious, as if they are to blame for everything. Is that fair? As the secret unfolds, she calls out the sins of heads of state, of nations, and all humanity. But if the representatives of God would live up to their vocation, can they avert the disastrous consequences when a society chooses the path of sin? Isn't everyone free to choose good or evil? Why blame the priests and religious? Look carefully at the conclusion of this opening paragraph. It's not a matter of blaming one group for the sins of another group, but an appeal to the duty of priests and religious to atone for sin. Quote, there are no more generous souls, no one worthy any more to offer the unblemished victim to the Eternal on behalf of the world. Priests and religious have a special calling to be united to the Lamb of God. A priest is another Christ, alter Christi. We should call out the sins of the sheep who are straying, even those in powerful positions who might crucify him. At his ordination, he laid down his life to carry on the work of the Savior, through prayer, through fasting, through good example, and above all, through his power to offer up for the world the body and blood of Christ. But if the priest is not striving to be worthy to approach the altar, then his union with Christ is compromised. A priest has received many graces in his life and the privilege of studying the Word. Jesus warned, to whomever much is given, of him will much be required. A religious has a similar responsibility. Only a small percent of religious are also priests, but they are consecrated victims, more radically, taking vows of poverty and obedience to a rule of life and a superior. One good convent is a bulwark against evils for a society, and a steady flow of graces through their intercession. The Queen of Heaven weeps on that mountain and cries out in grief and anger, there are no more generous souls, no one worthy any more. This lack of generosity, this attachment to the perishable things that money can buy, this love of honor that feeds pride, and indulgence in pleasures of flesh, even petty departures from the rule, all this is so fleeting in the light of eternity. Why can't we sacrifice these things for a short time? God does not cease to call souls to help him with the harvest. How many people hear the call to the priesthood and religious life and say to God, "No, thank you. I prefer to indulge myself in the fleeting joys of earth." And how many people never even hear the call because their life is too filled with noise? But are we sure that these dire words don't indicate a moment in the future? Quote, "There are no more generous souls, no one worthy anymore." I assure you that this is prophetic language. Listen to Psalm 14. Yahweh looks down from heaven upon the children of men to see if there are any that act wisely, that seek after God. They have all gone astray. They are all alike corrupt. There is none that does good. No, not one. But the psalmist is talking about them, not everybody. Later in the psalm we hear, "They shall be in great terror, for God is with the generation of the righteous." If Mary complains that there are no more generous souls, she is using prophetic language to say that there aren't enough generous souls to offset the amount of sin in society. We can definitely point out great saints active somewhere in the world since the time of the apparition at La Salette. But great sin in society requires many great saints, or at least great numbers of aspiring saints. Our Lady is talking about a time when the low numbers of laborers in the vineyard is obvious to everyone, and or when the bar for holiness among the servants of God has fallen very low. Last week, we considered the situation of the church in 1858. At some levels, it was thriving with extraordinary fervor and vocations. Parents were very generous in allowing their children to join missionary congregations, and it was often a death sentence. The sea voyage alone was risky. The testimony from Father Björn about Okape is moving. In 1988, he set out from his homeland in Ireland to serve as a priest in Nigeria. All of the missionaries who preceded him had died in their 20s or early 30s. The constant and difficult travel on impossibly poor roads, the malaria, the scorching heat, and the unfamiliar food took its toll on the health of these brave Europeans. If that was the situation in the 1980s, what was it like in the 1880s and the 1840s? Juxtaposed with the great fervor of many French Catholics in the 1800s, we talked about the problem with the French bishops. Many were involved with the ideals of Freemasons, and some were even covert members of this secret society. We can't prove by a public roster which bishops, archbishops, and cardinals belong to this secret society, but they can be recognized by their actions. They were terrified by what the secret might reveal. We know that it was generally taken for granted by the hierarchy that the secret was invented by French royalists who were using the children to say that heaven had named the successor to bring about the restoration of the French Catholic monarchy. The saintly Bishop de Brouillard personally funded Melanie's dowry as a novice because she aspired to join the Sisters of Providence who had cared for her and Maximin from the time of the apparition. But as soon as he died, the next bishop cut off the dowry and convinced a visitor from England to take Melanie back with him to place her in a Carmel. She was still learning French and hardly knew a word of English, but she consented to remain in this place of prayer and penance until it was time to publish the secret. 7 years later, she obtained permission from the Bishop of England to leave the cloister to fulfill her obligation regarding the apparition. Sheer panic gripped the upper ranks of the clergy in France. Not one bishop in the whole of France would allow Melanie to sojourn in his diocese. If she were to visit friends or relatives, no priest was allowed to give her Holy Communion. She remained spiritually exiled from France until her death in Italy in 1904. How could all the bishops act as one like this? They weren't taking their orders from Pope Pius IX or Leo XIII, who were in favor of La Salette. Who was directing all these bishops, perhaps even threatening them into compliance with this blockade against the bearers of a text which none of them had yet read? And even after it was published in Italy, and they could read that it didn't name any successor to the throne of France, they began to attack the messengers with calumnies, hurling lie after lie. What hidden entity was coordinating this attack? Today we call it a deep state or a deep church because it is assumed that there is an invisible hidden agency with an agenda which pressures or cajoles the visible leaders into compliance. Before we consider the situation of the clergy in 1958 and 1964, let's glance for a moment at the part of the secret that concerns religious. Woe to those priests and persons consecrated to God, who by their infidelity and wicked lives are crucifying my Son again. The sins of those consecrated to God scream to heaven and call for vengeance. The text will become even stronger as the secret progresses. We've spoken of French congregations of great fervor in the 1800s, but there were others that were focused on living a comfortable life despite their vows of poverty. What testimony do I have? A century and a half earlier, we have the despicable persecution of St. Margaret Mary Alacoque. However, in France, there were many convents of her visitation order, and we know that the family of St. Therese was intimately familiar with many excellent visitandines. These nuns had educated Therese and her sisters. Their aunt was a very good visitation nun. St. Therese's sister Leonie became a visitandine. Over in Germany, Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich died in the 1820s, and we know that she was treated badly in her Augustinian convent because she came from a poor family and could not offer the convent the required dowry. She was admitted on the condition that she would serve all her life as an organist. Father Shoup relates in his book that in 1859, a novice in the Benedictine Abbey of Latrobe, Pennsylvania, experienced a series of encounters with a monk from purgatory who begged for help in expiating the sin of having neglected to celebrate 7 masses of obligation. He related that all of the 5 priests who had died so far in that American community were still in purgatory. Regarding the religious of France of the 1800s, I can only testify to having read dozens of books on the life of the Little Flower. We have volumes of testimony regarding her community, where she spent 9 years. Therese became a doctor of the church because she taught confidence in God with such conviction that her writings almost single-handedly wiped away the plague of Jansenism that had infected Catholics for 2 centuries. The excessive fear of God, who was regarded as a tyrant ready to punish every minor infraction, did not inspire a warm and deep prayer life, but fear and coldness. Moreover, this attitude often turned religious superiors into petty bullies, as in Therese's convent. Yes, there were faults of laziness, lack of fervor, love of comfort, but could these be categorized as sins that screamed to heaven? The Bible is rather precise about the sins that cry to heaven. Murder, Genesis 4:10. Sodomy, Genesis 18. Oppression of the poor, Exodus chapter 2. And defrauding workers of their just wages, James chapter 5. I consulted many translators, and the consensus was that Our Lady used a stronger expression in the secret than cry to heaven. The best English equivalent is scream to heaven. Let's take these 4 biblical sins to the next level. Murder, not of Genesis 4, of Abel, an adult man, but hundreds of thousands of murders of innocent children in the womb, without any sedative, and often for the sale of body parts. And what about the incalculable murders that happen with the use of birth control? Surely this sin is screaming to heaven in our day like never before. Then there is sodomy, not of Genesis 18, by people who were contemporaries of Abraham and had not yet received the law of Moses. At Sodom and Gomorrah, these actions were happening with consenting adults. What about now, where exploitation of children has given rise to psychologically damaged individuals who become confused about their gender or who find the opposite sex so brutal that they demand the right to marry someone of their own sex in a union completely sterile and usually ending in depression? Yes, surely this sin is screaming to heaven in our day like never before. Then there is oppression of the poor, as related in Exodus, as Pharaoh enslaved the Israelites to build his cities, and most likely some pyramids. Consider debt enslavement by all the Ponzi schemes of modern governments. Never mind the multiple ways the same dollar gets taxed. Consider that young Americans will spend most of their lives paying off the loan for their education, their house, their automobile, their health insurance, and so much else. Technically, these are free people, but in reality, they are every bit as enslaved as in the days of Pharaoh. Finally, there is the sin of defrauding laborers of just wages. How many manufacturers leave wealthy countries because in poor countries they don't have to pay a fair wage? Millions die of acute hunger every year, while governments invest in weapons and don't protect the wages. What about wealthy countries where the middle class is being destroyed because small businesses cannot compete with megastores? Never have we seen so much fraud in wages as in our present day. Yes, all these sins scream to heaven. But I cannot honestly say that convents in Melanie's time were indulging in the sins that cry to heaven. In the 1920s, our Lord complained about the sins of religious to persons like Venerable Josefa Menendez and Blessed Dina Belanger in the 1920s. But he was looking for more affection and generosity from his brides. He wasn't listing crimes. Nuns from purgatory would sometimes appear to Sister Josefa to warn other religious. Here are some quotes from these sisters in purgatory. "I had a long religious life, but I spent my last years rather in taking care of my health than in loving our Lord." Another, "In my order, pleasures were few and comforts still fewer, but one can always manage to secure some, and the smallest immortifications have to be expiated here. To restrain one's eyes, to refuse oneself the gratification of a little curiosity, may at times cost a big effort. But here the eyes are tormented by the impossibility of seeing God." Another nun in 1922 appeared to her and accused herself of failings against charity and of having murmured at the election of one of her superiors. And the fourth, "During my religious life, I talked a great deal and with little prudence. I often aired my impressions and complaints, and these indiscretions were the cause of faults against charity, which my sisters then committed." Those are extracts from the book of Sister Josefa, Way of Divine Love. Jumping ahead to number 11 in The Secret, Mary says, "In the year 64, Lucifer with a great number of demons will be unleashed from hell. They will abolish faith little by little, even in those consecrated to God." So what about our time? Was Our Lady talking about 1864 or 1964? 1858 or 1958? We are supposed to be asking this question. If the prophecy has already been fulfilled, then we should look through history to learn the lessons. If it's not yet come to pass, then we need to prepare for chastisements. Right? No, I don't think it's quite that simple. Remember 2 Chronicles. King Nebuchadnezzar took into exile in Babylon to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah until the land had enjoyed its Sabbaths. All the days that it lay desolate, it kept Sabbath to fulfill 70 years. That was chapter 36, 20 to 21. After David's time, Israel as a whole had not been faithful to the law for many years. The Sabbath worship had become haphazard at best and idolatrous at worst. As for the Sabbath rest, well, there was always work to do, items to sell, and it just seemed silly to spend that day in unprofitable rest. Israel was under covenant, and God was declaring through his prophets that it was payback time. 1 day a week belonged to him, and now he was calling in the chips. there would be no work in the fields of God's holy land for 70 years because his people would be hauled off to Babylon. 70 years later, a devout Jew who had been born in exile was expecting some kind of deliverance soon. But this holy man Daniel was worried. After all these years in exile, only a remnant cared about returning to the promised land to rebuild the temple. Daniel wanted assurance that a remnant would be enough. He felt in his heart that there was a deeper meaning in the 70 years of Sabbaths. He prayed for understanding, and the archangel Gabriel appeared to him, saying, 70 weeks of years are decreed concerning your people and your holy city. God will cherish and guard this remnant. They will glorify him by keeping the faith for 490 years, at which time the Messiah will come to the temple. 5 centuries later, worship at the temple was going strong, and Jews were wondering if John the Baptist might be the Messiah. They had been counting the years. They were on the lookout. Prophecies matter. There is some kind of mystery in the fact that Our Lady told Melanie to publish The Secret in 58, but Melanie couldn't get it published until 79. Yet in paragraphs 11 and 18, Our Lady wanted people to be prepared for events in 64 and 65. The only way that all this makes sense in my mind is to assume that The Secret was indeed pertinent to Melanie's era, but also to our era. If those seeds of evil had been pulled up by the roots back in 1858 through conversion of hearts, in the radical way the kingdom of Nineveh responded to Jonah's warning, then those evil seedlings would not have come to fruition, and we would not be experiencing so much diabolical chaos today. Jesus put another parable before them, saying, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat. There is some blame here. The watchmen had fallen asleep at their posts. But there are weeds, and there are weeds. Some weeds are just nuisance plants, but some weeds are almost wicked. Some have a network of roots that suck the nutrients from the other plants. They grow large and tall and shade out the good plants, and they have thorns and briars that brush against the good wheat and injure it. Prophets are sent to warn us about bad seed, and when the Queen of Heaven is sent as prophetess, then we need to understand that this seed was straight from hell, and we are surrounded by a veritable forest of weeds. The watchmen in the 1800s were not good priests who were just a bit lazy in their duties. These watchmen had an agenda. They were helping the enemy sow bad ideas to replace the culture of faith with a new society free from the law of God. The encyclicals of Pope Pius IX and Leo XIII are highly instructive about what was going on at that time. In Etsi Multa, Pope Pius IX outlined all the dangers that were threatening the Catholic Church. The primary issue was Kulturkampf, the culture war. It was a war of the state against the church. A series of radical laws was sweeping through Germany, Switzerland, Austria, Italy, and Belgium to seize control of education and even ecclesiastical appointments. The Pope believed that Freemasons and its philosophy was responsible for Kulturkampf. The Freemasons had worked their havoc decades earlier in the French Revolution, and now the spirit of revolution against God was creeping through Europe. Pope Pius IX aligned Freemasonry with the Book of the Apocalypse, quoting number 28. Some of you may perchance marvel that the war against the Catholic Church extends so widely. Indeed, each of you knows well the nature, zeal, and intention of sects, whether called Masonic or some other name. When he compares them with the nature, purpose, and amplitude of the conflict waged nearly everywhere against the Church, he cannot doubt but that the present calamity must be attributed to their deceits and machinations for the most part. For from these the synagogue of Satan is formed, which draws up its forces, advances its standards, and joins battle against the Church of Christ. And to the angel of the church in Smyrna write, I know your tribulation and the slander of those who say that they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Apocalypse chapter 2. And Apocalypse chapter 3, and the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, Behold, I will make those of the synagogue of Satan, who say they are Jews and are not, but lie, behold, I will make them come and bow down before your feet, and learn that I have loved you. In the New Testament, Christians are referred to as the New Israel. All of the first Christians were Jews, so the term Jew, as St. John used it, referred to an Israelite who rejected Jesus and was looking for some other Messiah. The apocalyptic synagogue of Satan is an anti-church. These are our times. In Melanie's time, the seeds of secret societies were growing up, but still hiding among the wheat and sinking deep roots into the soil. The popes kept calling them out, but there were Freemasons among the cardinals and bishops. It was a stealth war. In 1877, there was a special Masonic lodge established in Italy to promise absolute privacy of membership for persons in high ranks. It went by the name of P2 and would be active for a century to come. In his encyclical Humanum Genus, Leo XIII calls Freemasonry the city of Satan. He gave Freemasonry another apocalyptic name. He called it a plague. He issued one encyclical after another because he wanted to expose to the light the goals and philosophy and the methods of these people who operated in darkness. He explained how their ideas morphed into naturalism, paganism, pantheism, and how they are always attacking the rights of the church to have a voice in the public square, and how religion has no right to regulate marriage or morality. Pope Leo, a true lion, listed 6 points on the agenda of Freemasons in Humanum Genus, his opus magnum. 1, to replace Catholicism with the customs of paganism. 2, to replace the order of justice with the rule of autonomy. 3, the concept that all men are equal does not mean that all men can exercise free will. The state must determine what's good for society. 4, that Freemasons were working with communists and socialists to replace divine law with human law. Now, we are decades before Lenin and communist Russia. Communism emerged from revolutions in the communes of Paris back in the 1840s. 5, Freemasons had whispered into the ears of rulers and corrupted them. 6, Freemasons had whispered their ideas into the ears of the common people to confuse them. That you can confer those from paragraphs 24 to 28. I want to give credit to David L. Gray, who is basically today's expert on Freemasonry in the Catholic Church. I urge you to go to his channel and check out his whole course on Freemasonry. It's amazingly done. And he himself was a Freemason until his conversion to the Catholic faith. And he was very high-ranking, and so he knows what he's talking about. Freemasonry was rampant in Italy and had helped to topple and capture the Papal States in the time of Pius IX. Leo XIII ascended the throne with no earthly income to manage the affairs of the Church. Eventually, the brilliant Pius XI would negotiate some rights for the Church and carve out a few acres of territory as the Vatican State. But Leo was living in an era of chaos. He appealed to all Catholics to contribute in a collection that came to be known as Peter's Pence. The corrupt bishops of France often held the money captive, making demands that Leo could not publicly say this or that. Heaven blessed the Church with the steady stream of heroic and holy men to lead the Church, starting with Pius IX. His immediate predecessors were not bright stars, like Pope Benedict XIV, who held the rudder steady during World War I. But we need to stay on target here. The ideals of Freemasonry took deep root beyond France through Prussia. Pope Pius IX had stated earlier, the main proponent of the Masonic goals was Kulturkampf, culture wars, which have continued to this very day. And in Leo's time, the man in charge was Otto von Bismarck, the leader of Prussia. With every war, the borders in Europe shift around, so you don't need to be embarrassed if the nation of Prussia is a rather fuzzy idea in your mind. Prussia included parts of modern-day Germany, Russia, Poland, Denmark, Belgium, and the Czech Republic, as well as other parts of some surrounding nations. In other words, it was an empire. Yet France, with its series of Napoleons, had dominated Europe. In its pride, France offered insults to Bismarck, and war ensued. Years ago, I somehow acquired an old French holy card with lace edges. Our Lady of La Salette is seated weeping. Paris is in the background. It commemorates one event which vindicates her warning to the nation exactly 24 years before. The inscription on the card says it all. The Siege of Paris, September 19, 1870. Prussia was victorious, and Napoleon III was toppled. But Our Lady had the situation under control. Paris surrendered January 28, 1871. What had happened 10 days before, on Tuesday night, January 17th? In a little village called Pont-Main, 200 miles west of Paris, Prussian troops were at its borders. This village was in the Vendée, evangelized long ago by St. Louis de Montfort. These people were strong, devout Catholics who had an impressive regime of daily prayer. On that snowy evening, some children were doing their chores and saw a light in the sky. It was Mary. The whole village gathered to listen to the children describe what they were seeing. Mary was smiling and keeping time with their hymns. She assured them that their prayers were being heard, and suddenly the war was over. Yes, her enemy, the Great Sin, would dominate society in an apocalyptic battle that continues even until our day. But the victory will be hers, and she is attentive to those who pray. We'll continue our reflection on the great news of La Salette because she told the children twice for emphasis, "My children, you will pass this on to all my people." If you are listening, you are her people. God bless you.